honored to have you. I'm one of your biggest fans, as you hopefully know by now. I love everything you stand for. I love how you approach work, how you approach people. Every time I talk with you, I feel like a better person. I feel better inside and I feel like a better person after that. So thank you so much for, taking the time today to share all of your knowledge and all of your advice with our network. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do before you jump into your content.
Yay. Well, I feel all of those things about you. It's totally mutual. And it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. Um, Not only is this going to be an amazing conversation, I am also procrastinating on my Thanksgiving hosting duties, and this is the perfect thing to do instead of hand wash my china dishes. So thank you very much for that opportunity. Well, everyone, I'm Dr. Andrea Hollingsworth, and I work with organizations that want to instill a culture of compassion and also self-compassion so that they can lead with heart and supercharge resilience and get business results that matter. I do keynote speaking and I also do consulting, which can involve a lot of different things, coaching, workshops, you name it. But if you would like to learn more or schedule just a time to chat with me and connect with me, I would love that. You can just visit my website, hollingsworthconsulting.com. There's a little form you can fill out, or you could just email me. Honestly, just email me at andrea@hollingsworthconsulting.com and we'll set something up. Well, I live in Minnesota, USA. It's cold and snowy here today, but we have weird weather here, and sometimes we get snowstorms in April. It's a little strange. Well, last April, my son and nieces made a nice spring snowman. It was an April morning. We got, a weird snow dump, but by afternoon, the heat had risen and things had gotten, they had gotten quite ugly. Quite ugly. Y'all, our neighborhood gave us an award on Facebook for having the world's most demonic snowman in our backyard. It's probably the most awesome award I've ever received. Anyway, but isn't that sort of what happens when the proverbial temperature goes up? And now I'm kind of being serious here now because there's a lot of collective overwhelm and change and trauma out there everywhere. And the heat is rising pretty quickly for all of us, just societally. Times are not easy right now for many of us. And y'all, when that happens, things kind of start to fall apart, right? Workers start to fall apart. Things sometimes get a little bit ugly when the overwhelm and the trauma is too much. Morale, retention, engagement, performance, all of these things suffer, and it can look a little or a lot like a bit of a horror show, okay? So today, I want to briefly introduce 4 powerful research-backed keys to addressing these workplace uglies and putting people and teams back together. And all 4 of them center on one maybe unlikely word, compassion. And so here they are: radical self-compassion, compassionate awareness, compassionate listening, and compassionate action. Taken together, these are the 4 elements of my Compassion Advantage program, and they benefit both people and profits when it comes to boosting resilience and getting people back on track when things just are kind of feeling hard, business-wise and just people-wise. So let's go. Let's get into this. The first key is something called radical self-compassion, and this is what I talked about at X Day. Some of you were there, but many of you weren't. I love this quote from Pema Chodron: compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. Here's the thing though, there's one inward character that almost all of us have that so often prevents us from being present and connected to others. It's our inner critic, And here I have a bit of a story to tell you. So I devoted my 20s and my early 30s to climbing the ranks of academia. I was a professor. And by age 35, I had gotten my dream job. I had a tenure track professorship at a highly ranked university on the East Coast. I had arrived, and my friends and my colleagues would say, like, wow, congratulations. How did you do it? It's like, I don't know. I love what I do. I'm passionate. I work hard. But what I never said to anybody was that a large portion of my success was highly dependent on the shrill and unrelenting voice of my inner critic. I remember one time I was giving a presentation at Princeton on ancient meditative practices and modern day neuroscience. It's actually medieval meditative practices and modern day neuroscience. And I thought the presentation went really well. That was what I studied. I felt great about it. But there was this guy sitting in the front row. You can see him on the slide. He's kind of turning his head like this. He had a scowl on his face the whole time. And during the Q&A, after I was done, he raised his hand and he stood up and he said, did you look closely at the original Latin of the medieval text that you were referencing? And I said, no. And he said, well, if you consult the original Latin, it seems to indicate that, and then he went on and on to undercut my entire argument based on the fact that I had relied on an English translation of this medieval text. I don't know Latin. And of course, my inner critic sprang into action. She was like, why didn't you consult the original Latin? I'm like, because I don't know Latin. She's like, of course you don't know Latin. You're so lazy. You're such a dabbler. If you ever want real scholarly respect, you better not just teach, research, publish, serve on committees, mentor students, all the things you're doing. You better get your butt in gear and learn Latin now. And I listened. And so pretty soon, you all, not long after this talk, I found myself at 3:30 a.m. every day. This is not a joke. Studying my Latin flashcards. You can all guess what happened. I burned out. At the age of 36, I walked away from my dream job at Boston University. I had just started there and I walked away. My inner critic chose fear, isolation, and disconnection. I just didn't have the bandwidth to care anymore. I didn't care about my work, and I honestly didn't care very much about those with whom I worked, students and colleagues, and the way I left was just terrible. Why did all of this happen? Let's get nerdy. Let's talk about the brain. Did you know that your brain can't tell the difference between self-criticism and self-rejection and criticism and rejection from another person? Both are processed in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the pain center of the brain, which means that when we're beating up on ourselves, it hurts. It literally hurts and it keeps us stuck because you can't learn and you can't grow when your brain is on fire and like fight, flight, flee, fawn, all that stuff mode from your own inward attacks, which means that you usually end up repeating your mistake. And maybe even worse, chronic self-criticism can cause us to project our inward judgments and criticality and rejection onto other people. And this is when we're at our worst. Maybe you've been around somebody who just oozed criticality toward everybody that they met, judgment everywhere. I bet some of you are thinking of a particular individual right now. I know I am. And I would bet a lot of money that that person secretly couldn't stand their own self. And it makes sense because when your brain is beating up on itself, it's almost impossible to cultivate safety and authenticity and trust with other people, especially with those that you lead. When there's managerial toxicity from this runaway criticality, employee listening is especially important. And this is where a company like QuestionPro can really help you out. Specialized surveys, powerful analytics can get to the heart of some of the pain points and provide clear action steps for helping to rebuild safety and trust. But for most of us, self-compassion doesn't come easy. We are hardwired to be hard on ourselves, and so we need some tools. And I'm going to give you a tool here today. So if you're checking email or doing something else, come back. I want you to, we're going to do this all together. So I want everybody to think, just be mindful of the way that you're sitting in your chair right now. So sit in a way in which your back is straight but supported, and your feet are flat on the floor, and your sits bones are aligned and centered. And so you just feel comfortable in your chair. And now I invite you to take a nice deep breath in through your nose. Make it the deepest breath you've taken yet today. And then exhale. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel your belly relax and expand. And just settle. And now if you feel comfortable, go ahead and gently close your eyes while I ask you to go through this exercise. I want you to think of something that you recently did or said that you regret. Some mistake, some mess, some imperfection that reared its ugly head. Just think of that thing. And now I want you to notice, what is your inner critic, and we all have one, what is your inner critic telling you regarding that moment of regret or imperfection or mistake? Keep breathing and just notice what your inner critic is saying. And now gently open your eyes. And now I'd like you to pick one word or phrase that you heard in your head from your inner critic. And we're going to do a live poll now. And I'd like you to enter it into the chat. And we're going to get a sense of what all of our incredibly mean inner critics are telling us. And this is going to help just normalize the fact that, yes, we are all way, way, way too hard on ourselves. It's all your fault. Should have. Trust. Mean. How could you? This is embarrassing. If only. Good. Keep them coming. If you can identify one word or one phrase. Thank you, everybody. Yep. Awful. How could you? Embarrassing. You are better than this. Lame. Yeah, these are mean things. These are mean ways of talking to ourselves. Not good enough. Good. You are better. So thank you, everybody. That's kind of vulnerable for doing that, but I appreciate it a lot because it's just a way of normalizing the fact that this is just how it goes in our heads a lot of the times, okay? Now we're going to do another exercise that's a little bit more positive, okay? So for this one, I'm going to ask you to imagine that your best friend just came to you in a moment of vulnerability, looking for empathy and support because they're struggling with the very thing you yourself were just thinking about. They made the same mistake, they have the same imperfection, whatever. They're down on themselves and they come to you and they just need a friend. They need some support and some empathy. What do you say to them? Pick one word or one phrase that you would say to your friend and enter it into the chat. You're only human. You're human. Sanja and I, it looks like we have the same ones. I'm here for you. Good. Good, good, good. These are incredibly powerful things to say to someone who's struggling. It's not your fault. Get back up. This doesn't define you. Good. Sanja and I keep mirroring each other. This doesn't define you. Wonderful. You'll do it differently the next time with intent. So just notice the difference. Notice the difference, everybody. I'm going to switch back now. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in our live poll here. But I want us all to notice the difference here. The way that we speak to ourselves in our own heads and the way that we speak to other people is often very, very different. And what I want to encourage you to do is to start responding to your struggling self in the same way that you respond to your struggling friend. And then do it over and over. And this is why it's radical self-compassion, because it requires this radical, high-octane tenacity to keep changing the ways that we relate to ourselves in our own heads. Healthy striving is great. Accountability is great. But when we're shaming ourselves and beating up on ourselves like that, it can really hinder us. So keep going with changing your inward self-talk. And it really helps to imagine, how would I approach somebody else who is struggling with the same issue, and then turn it back on yourself over and over and over again. So that is the first step to the compassion advantage. If this radical self-compassion stuff resonated with you, if you feel like you could use a little bit more support or dive into it a little bit more for yourself, for your leadership journey, I encourage you to download the 3-step guide to radical self-compassion. It's totally free, and I think it's a wonderful tool to really start relating to yourself differently when it comes to those all too human moments that we all have. It's going to boost your resilience, it's going to make you happier, and it's going to make you a better leader. So I'm going to now transition, and Sanja, maybe you and I could just chit chat about some of this stuff. What occurred? What are some of your thoughts and questions as you were listening?
Oh, and I have so many, and I would encourage anyone who's joined us to please put yours in the chat. I'll keep an eye out. We'll keep an eye out behind the scenes, because as you can tell with mine and Andrea's responses, we talk quite often. So I feel like I get the benefit of her brilliance always. Andrea, one thing, that always comes to mind is, for me, I totally to prescribe to everything you're saying, and I've also had the pleasure of hearing you speak multiple times. And yet this inner critic won't go away. It's one of those things that I feel like I know better. I know better than to beat myself up, yet it still happens with more frequency than I'd like to admit. Now, I think maybe I would hope I bounce back from it faster, or I go to more like that compassionate talk that you're talking about, saying hey, I'm only human and I'm trying the best that I can. And then sometimes she'll still come back and say, well, maybe you're trying the best that you can, but you should actually be doing better. Is this really your best? What are some of your recommendations as we continue to practice this in a way? I think sometimes, to me, it almost gets more frustrating when I feel like I would have known better, and then I sometimes spiral. So for those of us joining us in the conversation that are saying, hey, this sounds great, but if I regress at some point, or if I'm not as compassionate with myself as I'd like to be, what are some ways for me to continue to give myself grace and not almost beat myself up because I'm beating myself up? Oh, wait, I can't hear you, and I don't know why. Maybe I'm the only one. I can't. I don't know if our audience wants to pop in, because maybe it's just me. Oh, nope, it's not just me. Okay. All right, we'll give you a second. No, it's interesting, because speaking of self-compassion, I don't know if you could all see me while Andrea was talking. At one point, my headphones went flying. And so that's why I thought, I'm like, maybe she's in my headphones,
How
but I
about
can't
now?
find them. Yes, now I can hear you. Perfect.
You know what? I think I got a little too animated and I hit the off button on my microphone.
No, we're good.
So one really easy hack that I will sometimes suggest to folks when they notice they're just down in themselves yet again, this is a way of preempting that or intervening ahead of time, so that when that happens, you have something you can do. So if you have a smartphone and you have an audio record setting on there, do that exercise that you just did, where you're pretending that you're comforting your best friend who just totally messed up or is feeling like they're not good enough, and record a little 2-minute, oh, sweetheart, I've done that a million times. This mistake does not define you. You're so much bigger and you're so much better than whatever it is just happened. We are all human. I've messed up too. You're on a journey. you know, think of where you're going. Like, this is just a hiccup on the way to like the amazing destination ahead of you. You know, whatever you want to say to your best friend, record it into your phone. And then the next time you notice yourself just incredibly down on yourself, play it in your car, or, you know, stop what you're doing and take a walk and just listen to it, you know, on a break at work or whatever. You can just be like, oh yeah, that's the, because we all have different parts of us, you see, and like that's the wiser, stronger part of you going like, get your you know what together. Like it's, you're okay, like you're human. And it's gonna make that inner critic just soften and smallify a little bit, because you are, you know, you're calling on that bigger, better part of you to just talk to you, and then listen and believe that bigger, better part of you, because that's the true part of you.
Yeah.
So that's just
No,
one little hack, but
yeah. Well, and I love it because I think it's very practical, and for better or worse, most of us are always with our phones. So it's
yeah,
definitely,
right.
it's like no matter where you are, you
So
can do
true.
it.
Yeah.
And I like it because I haven't tried it yet. And I think it would help because it would force me to pause and say things out loud, which I think makes such a big difference sometimes because when we're doing things in our head, it can turn into a game of ping pong really fast and then you kind
Yeah.
of lose it. And then before you know, you probably get another message and you forgot. But that forgetting is not a good thing. That forgetting is you're probably still sitting with that strong inner critic feeling, and now you're kind of feeling down. What would be one of your suggestions? And maybe it's very similar as with a friend, but I'm trying to think of our teams and our managers,
Sure.
and we talk about company culture.
Yeah.
And I think, it's end of November, it's end of the year. A lot of people have annual goals, things they wanted to accomplish. And oftentimes in life, we just don't get to everything we wanted to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, the best people on our team are very conscientious and they're probably sitting there beating themselves up because they're saying, I could have done better. I should have done better. I can't believe it's December already and I didn't accomplish these things. And so, for
Yeah.
leaders, and I think, and one of the things you and I talked about leading up to this webinar that I love about our friends who are on is that all of you are on because you do care. We don't need to convince you that compassion is important because if probably we did, you would not be taking the time to be on this webinar. So you're probably here saying, I'm in, help me be better at this. And so when you
Yeah.
think about going into, the end of the year, last month, end of Q4, high stress, us knowing that again, a lot of our best people, if not all of our best people, are probably going in some way, whether it's personally, professionally, through this exercises of battling with their inner critic.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think maybe the best way to bring up this kind of exercises in a professional setting? Or is there another recommendation that you
Yeah.
would have from a leader to a team member standpoint for how leaders can help their teams practice self-compassion?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit different when there's some real underperformance or maybe a mistake that you need to address with an employee. And I'm going to talk about that later, by the way. I'm going to give you some things you can say if there's someone on your team who, you know, made a mistake or is dealing with maybe some really significant underperformance. How can you address that in a compassionate way? That's a bit of a separate conversation. But if you're a leader, I think simply just bringing up the topic of like, I'm, you know, being vulnerable. Like I'm stressed too. I'm finding myself like I'm not sleeping as well. You know, I'm having a hard time finding things to do finding time to do basic things like drink water, take care of myself. How are you taking care of yourself? Because those
Yeah.
physiological self-care activities that you can ask your employees about and say, you know, I care about your well-being. How's well-being? Make sure to prioritize that. I'm trying to prioritize that right now too because it's so stressful. That is going to give them more emotional bandwidth to be kinder to themselves, because we're harder on ourselves when we're exhausted, when we're hungry, when we're dehydrated, all the things, right? And so taking care of your body at a very basic level, really, really important. So modeling that. But then, you know, again, being vulnerable and saying, like, I tend to get really hard on myself this year. You know, I know, this is the time of year where we're looking at our goals and we're saying, what did we meet? What did we not meet? What did we get halfway to? What did we get like 18% to, right? And so again, saying, you know, this is what we're doing. I'm doing it. You're doing it too. And I just want to urge you, like, to balance that. Yes, reach for the stars, healthy striving. We all want that. But then this acknowledgement of common humanity. You can say
Yeah.
words like, we are all human. We all have limits. We are all doing the best we can. And if an employee's like, I don't know if I'm doing the best I can, like I just blah, 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 then the next words out of your mouth can be something like, we hired you for a reason. We hired you for a reason. You have such amazing talent, skills, and potentials. What are the roadblocks that I can help you remove so that you can step into your best? It sounds like there are some. What can I help with? And maybe, you're not your employee's therapist, but maybe there are some resources you can point your employee to take a bit of a burden off. But reminding people that like, you're here for a reason. Like you've got so much going on, and when you're not meeting those goals, there are probably some roadblocks. So let's strategize around. So then you move it from that shame place, like I'm bad, I did bad, therefore I am bad, to like, no, I'm not bad. I just like I had some things in my way. So let's help get them out of the way. I hope that helps.
No, it does. And it actually reminded me that one of the questions we ask or we recommend for our clients to ask at QuestionPro is whether leaders lead by example, taking care of themselves. And that's usually one of the lower scoring questions. And so for leaders to think about that, because if, for
Yes.
example, I'm telling my team, take care of yourself, but every day I'm showing up with like bags under my eyes and really
Yeah.
grouchy because I didn't sleep, it's hard to say like, oh, she's telling me
Yeah.
this, but then she's not doing it. Should I do it or should I not do it? And
Yes.
then another question we ask is how much the manager actually supports the employee in their well-being. And that one tends to score a little bit better, but I think there's still improvement. And I love what you said about vulnerability, because I think there's still a lot of people who think like, I need to show up perfect. And for me to set this example, I need to exercise and sleep and do all these things that are good, but not always attainable. And that's not
Yeah.
the case. I would say when you're able to do that, celebrate it and share it. But also
Yes.
when you're not, share that as well, because it
Yeah.
allows people, like to me, whether it's professionally or personally, I open up to people a lot, and it's incredible how often then I hear me too. And I've seriously said to my friends sometimes, like, why didn't you say that before? Where have you been?
Yeah.
Like, if you told me that before, I wouldn't have been feeling so awful. And now I'm opening up, and now you're just saying something. So I think there is something about like what we were saying. And I think there were a few other people who also said, like, I'm only human, to remind people of that, because then it sets that bar lower, that it's not we need to show up as everything to everyone all the time. That's
Yeah.
not possible. We'll strive towards good things, but we also know, to celebrate it when we can and to be
Yeah.
okay with it and recognize and know where we're not. So I'm looking at the time, and I told you I would stay good, on timing for our chat. So I'll let you go back to
We're all
to the
good.
second
We're all good. This is such a good conversation. Yeah.
time.
We're going to have more time to talk. Everybody, I want you to keep track of your questions, comments, because I
Yeah.
have a bit more material, but then we're going to have more time to share and talk at the end. So please, you can
Yeah.
enter it into the chat with just a Q colon, and then I can find it really quick. Sonia can find it really quickly when we return to questions at the end. So here we go. Let's return to the other steps, the other pillars, the other keys to having compassionate, high-performing work cultures. So I love this quote from Simone Weil. She's my favorite philosopher. Attention is the purest form of love. They believe the greatest gift we can give one another is our intentional awareness of them. It's just that sense of, hey, somebody noticed that I was stressed, I was struggling, I was suffering. Somebody suspended judgment, and just saw me in my humanness, or maybe wondered about my story. Awareness matters pretty hugely, especially when there's change, there's challenge, there's uncertainty, and there's a lot of that right now. And keep in mind, you don't have to agree with someone fully or understand them perfectly to be compassionately aware of them. If you can just find the courage to say to yourself, hey, judgments can wait. I'm open to being surprised. I think you'll find points of genuine human connection with most people. But when it comes to being aware, there's a huge barrier we need to talk about, and it's the fact that paying sustained attention to anyone is pretty hard in today's world. Our attention gets hijacked every 10 seconds. Exhibit A, my smartphone. If the bells and lights and notifications and little red dots and blah, blah, blah on this thing make you feel like a sugared up toddler in a toy factory, you're not alone. That's how my brain feels. Digital distraction. It's the number one enemy of compassionate awareness in our world. Now, maybe the term boss phubbing is completely old hat to you, phubbing being a combination of phone and snubbing, but I only recently learned about it. So boss phubbing happens when I, as an employee, feel that my manager is distracted by their smartphone while in my presence. A recent study of US working adults, various sectors, found that when leaders are distracted by their phones, it undermines trust in the organization and it decreases employee satisfaction. Not surprising. And that in turn lowers job performance. Also not surprising. Another study on phubbing showed that when employees perceive their boss as using a phone more often during meetings and stuff, they tend to feel socially excluded. It's that like high school or junior high sense of like, oh, am I a cool kid or not? It looks like you're paying attention to something other than me. And that negatively impacts the whole organization's self-esteem and confidence. So when we fall prey to the unrelenting pull of our smartphones, we chip away at trust and belonging. If we're not there, and I mean there mentally, emotionally, with your presence, we can't care. I preach about the things that I need to be reminded about, right? I will readily admit that I have been guilty of phubbing. I've been guilty of phubbing with workplace-related things, but also in my family. But I'm working on it. My phone gets left in my purse or my desk drawer a lot more often than it used to. Notifications are turned off on social media apps. Go into settings, change the notifications. Just do it. I'm increasingly okay being MIA. So I've told the people that message me the most, look, I am trying to be a slow text responder. It's a work in progress, okay? So let's talk a little bit about, oh, I'm missing a slide here. That's okay. Step number 3 is compassionate listening. All right, compassionate listening. This is the third step or pillar to the compassion advantage. So you're aware, but then you need to listen. And I want to ask you now, what does it feel like when someone really listens to you? When you feel like you're right there with somebody and they really, really are listening to you. I'd like you to pick one word and I want you to enter it in the chat. We're going to do another live poll and we're going to see how everybody feels when they're truly listened to. So just pick one word. Cared for, important, validated, seen, good. Love it. These are fantastic words. Loved, yes. I'm going to add a few more too. I meant to say stronger. It said stronger, but I'm not going to let my inner critic take that one away. Good. These are fantastic words. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, all those things. Seen, loved, grateful, validated, important, strengthened. Yes. These are all really powerful things to feel. And all of these have the power to make work feel like a place where, people feel these things. And there's incredible culture transforming power in all of these ways that you make people feel when you really, really do listen to them. But it's a skill. It's a learned skill, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about how do you ask questions that set the stage for compassionate listening. So I'm going to share with you 3 practical tips for doing just that. And the first one is to make your questions purposeful. The key to a purposeful question is to be specific. You want your question to target something that you know is pressing and relevant to that person or that group. Like for instance, hey, I heard about that doozy client meeting you had last week. Oh my goodness, that sounded really tough. Are you having a better week? Have you recovered from that? Or wow, your work has really been on fire lately. I've noticed. It's so amazing. Like, what's energizing you? What protein shake are you drinking in the morning? You've been on fire. Or maybe something a little bit more painful. You could say, an example, hey, in this morning's meeting, Damien said something to you or made an offhand comment that it just gave me pause. I want to follow up with you. How did his comments feel to you? These kinds of things that reference a very specific, purposeful reason for your question, very powerful. Second, let curiosity permeate your questions. Let genuine curiosity permeate your questions. Because here's why. 9 times out of 10, we don't know what people are going through. We don't know what's actually on their mind. There's a quote from the ancient philosopher Philo of Alexandria, I think it is, that says, it's attributed to him anyway, and he says, be kind to everybody you meet, because everyone is fighting a hard battle that you know nothing of. And isn't that so true? So an attitude of curiosity says, hey, I don't know what's true of you, but I'm eager to find out. And you can be curious about someone without necessarily agreeing with them. You can say, hey, I'm just curious to know more, right? If somebody hints at something that's difficult, work-wise, personally, or what's the hardest thing about XYZ topic or situation, and why is it hard? Or I can see how much this matters to you. Tell me why it matters. What's the story behind that, right? And I'm thinking, especially in the US, like politics are, a whole big thing. We've recently been through a difficult election, very polarizing. Asking curiosity questions can be one way to form a humanizing connection with somebody without necessarily being in their camp. And then finally, make your questions humanizing. You want to ask questions that encourage people's real thoughts and feelings and experiences to be seen. So maybe some of you do icebreakers, like in your weekly team huddle. Instead of asking, hey, what's your favorite sandwich to order at whatever sandwich shop? We can all hide behind questions like that, right? Sure, no problem. What if you ask questions that raise people's blood pressure a little bit? Like, is there something you've thought of doing for a long time it's on your bucket list that you haven't done yet? What is it? And why haven't you done it yet? And then have everybody have a chance to go around and say what that thing is. Or, hey, imagine that you're 85, 90 years old and you're looking back and you have lived an amazing life. You're a wise and weathered elderly self. What advice does that future person have for you right now in life? And then have everybody go around. People can pass if they're not up for it, right? But questions like this that invite people to be a little bit more human and connected in a team call just as an icebreaker, have the potential to bring people together in a way that some of those more surface level questions don't. Purposeful, curious, humanizing questions can fast track that compassionate connection, especially when there's overwhelm, change, challenge, and uncertainty, because what we're looking to do here is to humanize work. Humanize work, okay? I have to say boundaries are important too, though, because no one will be helped if your compassionate listening results in you drowning under the weight of everybody's emotional stuff, okay? So I often advise people to have these inward mantras when things are getting hard with someone you're supporting, whether work-wise, personally. You can say to yourself inside, care, don't carry. Or I'm a supporter, not a savior. Okay, so those mantras of just if you're someone who tends to suffer with compassion fatigue or care too much, these are helpful. So the final step or pillar is compassionate action. Compassion doesn't just listen and empathize, it does something to help alleviate unnecessary stress, struggle, stuckness. Of course, we're all going to have stress and struggle. Some of it's unnecessary though, and we can act to relieve that. There are a lot of directions I could go here, but I think what's going to be most helpful, given the fact that I think we have a lot of leaders, a lot of HR leaders on this call, is to talk about how to act with compassion and directness in the wake of a mistake or underperformance with a team member. So I'm going to lead with a story here, true story. I've changed a couple of the details to protect identity, but this is my friend Kate. Kate is the CFO of a company that makes snack foods for kids. And a while back, one of her team members screwed up royally. You see, when you are making snack foods for kids, there are certain chemical ingredients you need to make sure are not included in the manufacturing recipe because they're a health hazard and they're illegal. Well, one of Kate's employees, Bob, put in a massive order for some snacks to be made at the overseas manufacturing facility, but failed to notice that a toxic and illegal ingredient was included in the recipe. The snacks got made, and when they arrived at the US shoreline, you can all guess what happened. The authorities tested them, and this bad ingredient was discovered, and the whole lot had to be confiscated and then just discarded. Y'all, it was a $2 million mistake. And this is not a massive company, okay? Now, Kate is one of the strongest and most effective leaders that I know. And so I asked her, I'm like, how did you handle this meeting with this employee after you learned about what happened? She said, she kind of took a deep breath and she's like, well, I followed my 5 points for corrective conversations. And they're so good that I have to share them with you. So here they are. Catharsis first. She said, she's like, I did all my yelling, kicking, screaming, and swearing before the meeting. And sometimes you're just mad. You're just mad at somebody. Get all of that out before you meet with them. Being in active, mean boss mode with someone is counterproductive. People just shut down. And I need to say this because there's too much, there's too much trauma at work out there from managers who yell at and berate and belittle their team members. I know this because I'm a therapist and I've had way too many clients out there in the workforce say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what my boss said to me this week. So that needs to stop. But say it like it is. So Kate said the very first thing she said is, I have to have a difficult conversation with you. Compassionate leaders don't beat around the bush. They have what Kim Scott calls radical candor, right? So telling the truth about this is going to be difficult. That is compassionate, even if the truth is hard. Listen, this keeps coming up, listening. So Kate's question here is help me understand, whatever thing they chose to do or say that led up to the mess up. And not in a pejorative way, not help me understand, not like that. But she really is open. She wants to know because she said she sometimes learns that there are factors involved that she wasn't aware of. And in this situation, there were. So her employee, Bob, there was another person that was supposed to be overseeing that whole ingredient process. And that person was just out to lunch, not doing their job. And so sometimes you learn, right, that there are other things going on. And you know what? The person who makes the biggest mistake is the person that deserves the deepest listening because their story contains the roadmap for how to do it better next time. Don't define them by their worst moment. When you do this, you shame them. No, you don't want to shame people at work. So Kate was obviously livid. She discovered this mistake, very angry, but she chose not to look at this employee and just see failure, right? And so again, she gave me the phrase, hey, we hired you for a reason. What are the roadblocks I can help remove so you can step fully into your best here? That's a really helpful phrase for any kind of mistake or underperformance when someone's probably already feeling really bad about it and they need to be reminded of their potential and framing it in terms of there must be some roadblocks. How can I walk alongside you to remove those? And then finally, show them exactly how to make it right. Kate always ends her meetings by showing the person, okay, here are the steps we can take to remedy this mistake. Here's what I need and here's when I need it. Again, that clarity, that candor, that's very compassionate. What you're aiming to do is you're aiming to be very direct and to say the hard things, but to do so in a connected and human way. Hard things in a human way, hard things with heart, however you want to put it. That's what it's all about as a compassionate leader. It's just that care that engenders trust, and it's also the accountability that enhances performance. It's both. It's never one or the other. So that is what I have here for my little presentation part, but I want to get back to discussion. So I am going to invite Sanja to kick us off with any thoughts, questions, stories, anything that occurred to you for these last 3 points.
Yes. And it's funny, you guys, I found myself taking notes and I have your presentation. I was still taking
Nice.
notes. There's just something about the action of like taking it in and oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So yes, of course I have lots of questions as you can imagine. And again, everybody please feel free to chime in with yours.
Please
So
do.
you were
Yeah.
talking about humanizing questions, and I have like 4 or 5 follow-up questions to that. So maybe I'll just like read them all to you and then you can kind of take
Please.
it. So I love that idea. And what I was thinking about is, so let's say maybe for many of us on this call, that would be a shift in how we run meetings. So my questions were, and maybe no particular order, but what is the best way to introduce it? So I'm thinking of like my team meeting. I think I have one coming up next Monday. And it was just like, hey everyone, what's going on? Hey, I have this question. It was like, what is going
Yeah.
on?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm generally open anyway, so maybe they wouldn't be like
Yeah.
as shocked, but so what's the best way to introduce it? How often do you do it? So I also have a lot of team meetings. I have like one monthly, one weekly, I have one-on-ones. And so it's like, do we do this all the time? Or what's kind of like a general guideline for a cadence?
Yeah.
Then when is the best setting to do it? So like, are there particular kind of meetings that are maybe more conducive? Is it like smaller meetings, bigger meetings? Is it team members that know each other, don't know each other? I know, I'm sorry you have to take notes because I have so many
That's
questions.
okay. I forgot number
And
two.
then
Well, yeah. Okay, go on to
and
number four.
then the last one I have as a follow-up
Yeah.
is it better to ask like positive questions, or I didn't know how to frame it. Like I didn't want to say negative, like maybe I said missed opportunities. So for example, we're
Mm.
going towards the end of the year, and is it, a question of like, hey, what are you most
Yeah.
proud of this year?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, what is one thing you didn't get to do and you wish you could have? And I could see benefit to both, but I
Yeah.
guess if we have to choose, maybe what's the right one when. So that's the
Yeah.
start of my question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have to preface it by saying that the questions that I referenced were out of Daniel Coyle's amazing book, The Culture Code. And so he suggests those as a way to increase vulnerability in teams. But there's so many different ways to ask humanizing questions in meetings, and they don't have to go into like every deep dark corner, right? You don't, there are boundaries at work, and that's a whole nother webinar I could talk about, right? And so you want to form humanizing connections, but you also do not want to make work like group therapy, right? And you want people to be able to have boundaries around what they share. So another question you could ask on more of the positive end. I loved your suggestion of like, what are you most proud of this year?
Yeah.
Another one I like to suggest is, what is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in nature?
Oh,
When did you see it? Where were you? Um, everybody can relate to being just blown away by I don't know, even something as simple as a sunset, right? But some people have traveled and whatnot, and just being able to share something like that. Or what's the most, what makes you feel most connected to the ones in your life that matter the most to you? That could be pets, that could be a partner, that could be kids, like whatever. That could even be something inanimate, like a special plant in the corner of my living room. Like, what makes
yeah.
you most connected to the ones in your life that matter the most? And then you're talking about connection. Like, well, I don't know. I love to cook for those that I, love, or I love to have a conversation, or I love to play pickleball, whatever it is. And then you're not only connecting, you're talking about connecting. It's very meta. Um,
Yeah.
so, in terms of introduction, like if you're not used to asking those kinds of questions, yeah, you're going to need some kind of introduction. If you're going from like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream as an icebreaker, or what are your weekend plans, to like, what are your deepest values for, the end of your life? People are going to be like, wait, wait,
Yeah.
wait, wait, what? So,
What
so
just happened here? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So, I think you could preface it with, also find a meeting where there isn't something really stressful and pressing, like a deadline you all have to talk about, or, where there's a little bit more wiggle room in your meeting, or maybe start it a little bit early, start it 5 or 7 minutes early if it's possible. And then just say something like, everybody, I've been thinking so much about how much I value my connections with all of you, not just at work, but on a human level. You all are amazing people. And I want to set up an opportunity for us to just go one step deeper together to get to know one another, because truly, this is an incredible team, not just of professionals, workers, but of people. And so I have this question I'm wondering about, and you can feel free to pass if maybe today's not your day to like go deep in any way, and that's totally fine. You can just say pass. But for those of us who would like to share, I'd love to know, like, what's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in nature? Could you tell us about it? Where were you? Who were you with? I just want to know, and I'll lead off. That would be one example, right? And then you start. You start with a vulnerability. You feel your
Mhm.
blood pressure rise as a leader first, and then let everybody take a turn. Does that help?
It does. And I actually
Yeah,
have a follow-up question because, I'm so
sure.
like scientific and calculated. So I know a few of my team members are actually on our listening or are with us on the webinar today. I think I'm going to try this on Monday because we have our monthly team meeting. So
Good.
with that, I feel like they're kind of going to be like, wait, maybe they don't know what I'm going to ask, so they can't prepare. But so I'm thinking like some of these questions maybe are things like people have never thought about or haven't thought about lately. Like, do you
Yeah.
think that there's still value in just because like this is where I'm thinking, I'm like, should I think of the question I want to ask my team and then like send it to them on like Thursday or Friday so they can think about
That's
it before the
great.
meeting?
That's
Or
a
is it
great.
kind of more spontaneous? Because sometimes people are on the spot, they're like, oh, I feel
Yeah.
like this is a great question, but wow, I don't know what exactly to
Yeah.
say. I haven't really thought about
You,
it. So what
you,
would be a recommendation, like before or in the moment?
I think before is a great
Mhm.
idea. If it's a Monday meeting, the Friday before, people have the weekend. Especially for you always want to ask yourself, how is this exercise or whatever going to impact the most vulnerable person on the meeting? The most
Yeah.
emotionally vulnerable, psychologically, but whatever. Not that we're sitting around diagnosing our team members, but like the other thing is that like folks are introverts. I'm actually an introvert. I present as an extrovert. It's all like learned skills, y'all. I'm actually an
Mhm.
introvert. So introverts often need a bit more time to think about, like what do I want to share?
Yeah.
What would feel good? And so a little bit of lead time is a fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Yeah.
Ah, thank you. And that kind of like validated because I was like, oh, am I overthinking this? And but now, so thank you. I'm glad that
You're not.
there's
Those are,
space for that too. And another thing I was thinking about, which was kind of funny when you were talking about digital distraction being number one distraction for compassion. Like I had my phone away. I mentioned before, for any of you that were on a couple minutes before, I was like snoozing all of my notifications on my computer, and out of the corner of my eye, I see boink, like
yeah.
things coming up. And to me, I think I do okay, for example, in the evenings, like when I'm with Mateo, when I'm with Martine, we're having our family time. I'm not one that sits at the dinner table with the phone next to me because I know Mateo is now at the age he's 6 years old. He notices. I also don't want to, make Martine angry either, even
Yeah.
though he's not 6 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now I'm thinking like and there's, how do you set the precedent for that? Because communication, it's really interesting. Sometimes maybe people got used to you answering things quickly. So then you
Yeah.
don't, and they're like, is she okay? Where did she go? What's going on? Or even if you're one that's saying, like, listen, like, I can't, I'm in a meeting. I don't want to be distracted. And I'm actually starting to practice that more. Like, I'm in meetings. I generally work remotely. And so I have my Slack messages, popping up. Usually it's Slack. Email
Mhm,
actually was good at muting those notifications.
mhm,
And I'm thinking as soon as I go to answer somebody's question, I'm not giving my undivided attention to the person that I'm in a meeting with. That's not fair. Like then I'm like not really helping either person. But then I feel like there's some societal norms where some people are just always on it. And I feel like some people value that. It's like, oh, I know if, I message Bob, like Bob's gonna get
mhm,
back to me like in a minute. And that
mhm,
but there's not, and so like, do you have some guidelines as we kind of think about, to me,
mhm.
I want to continue to be better at being present where I am, which means that I won't be present for everybody at every minute that they need me. Is it, I think you even mentioned this, like really outwardly saying to someone like, listen, I will get back to you, but right now I need to have
Yeah.
my undivided attention on the thing that's I'm focusing on at the moment. So then
Yeah.
when I'm with you, and so that way when somebody's messaging and they're like, okay, like you haven't gotten back to me yet, they're not that surprised. Like they know, like it's been discussed, it's been outwardly communicated. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know what would be some of your thoughts or tips around that as we
Yeah.
hopefully all try to, navigate not
Yeah.
being always on for everyone.
Yes. I loved everything you said and suggested. I do think It helps to talk to people, especially pick the top 5 people that message you the most on Slack or text or whatever, and make a note, like tell them like I'm actually working on responding a little bit more slowly and being more focused.
Mm,
Um, and then they know, and then you don't feel that pressure. They'll be like, oh, okay, like it'll be a little bit before, and that's fine. She's not mad at
yeah.
me. So that, because often we're worrying about other people's worry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then the other thing is to ask yourself, well, what story am I telling myself in my head that's supporting this belief that I have to respond to people immediately all the time? And I think this can sometimes go back to some of the perfectionism that I began with, is that we tend to be so hard on ourselves if we're not like all things to all people at all times.
Yeah.
And, maybe this is especially, I think it's especially true for women leaders, where they just, it's that sociocultural baked in expectation that I'm here to help you, right? And it's just like, sometimes there's so much research showing that just that focus and flow you can get from making mental boundaries around your attention, you
Yeah.
deserve that. You deserve it as much as anybody else. And so put up those boundaries, give yourself permission to do that. It is not your job to be at everybody's beck and call at every moment. It's actually going to decrease your performance, your ability to think and like problem solve and be creative. So
Yeah. No,
give
I
yourself that
love that.
permission.
And I think sometimes I'm worried that some behaviors are become almost like social norms. And that's
Yeah,
why people, it's like, what standard am I being held to? And if I'm seeing these other people doing it, should I be doing it too? But then it's understanding, why is it better for you? Maybe something works for somebody else, or maybe they haven't figured it out yet. But just because you're seeing these different things, kind of to stay true to your values and the
yeah,
belief in your approach.
yeah.
And then to your point, it's that communication and that connection. So I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to just pop a quick slide with Andrea's and my contact information for anybody that wants to stay connected, connect with us on LinkedIn, email us afterwards. Andrea, thank you so much for your time today. I feel like, again, every time we talk, I learn so much from you. I think for all of you joining us, like if you feel like you're taking in a lot and maybe it feels overwhelming and maybe you feel like, wow, there's so many things for me to do. I think it's a good thing, because I think that shows that you care, and all of us. And I think, Andrea, you've done such a good job of, giving examples that we're all works in progress. And I hope I gave some on my end too, that it's not, again, this is not something that you arrive to. It's not that you become a compassionate person and it's check, you become a compassionate leader and it's check, and you don't have to, worry about it or work on it. It doesn't mean that we're going to sometimes do things that maybe don't align with who we are, who we want to be. But that's
Mhm.
all part of that, like self-compassion, self-forgiveness. So, Andrea, thank you again
Yeah,
from the bottom of my heart. I'll pop back out so I can see you fully. Hopefully everyone grabbed our information. Just thank you for what you do. Thank you for all the goodness that you bring into the world, and for
oh,
everything that you
thank
shared with us
you.
today.
I loved being here. It was such a pleasure. And yes, likewise, likewise.
So
Thank you,
thank you,
everyone.
everybody. If you want to learn more about what Andrea does, we'll be sending, there were a couple of questions about recordings. We'll definitely be sending out a recording after. If you're curious about either one of our work, you know where to find us. And hopefully you can tell that we're really passionate about what we do. So we'd absolutely love to hear from you. So for those of you in the US, happy Thanksgiving. For those of you not in the US, happy holidays for all the holidays coming up, anything that you celebrate. And remember, in this very busy time, to be good to yourself, be kind, be compassionate to others, and just remember, it's always a work in progress.